Welcome to AI 103 Practice Exam, Computer Vision Solutions. This focused set contains 25 original questions for image analysis, multimodal prompts, image generation, image editing, API constraints, lifecycle status, and production computer vision decisions. Use each question to practice the design and implementation decisions you will need on exam day. Here is how this practice exam works. First, read the complete scenario and every response. Next, lock in your answer. You will have 3 silent seconds to commit, and you can pause the video whenever you need more thinking time. Then, I will reveal the correct response. Finally, I will explain why it works and reinforce the exam pattern. If this practice helps, like the video and subscribe to WebLizard Cert Lab for the next AI 103 set. Question 1. A media service uses the Azure OpenAI Sora 2 Preview v1 API to make targeted changes to previously completed generated videos. Match each workflow requirement to the correct API action. Requirements. 1. A completed video ID must seed a new render that reuses the source asset's structure, motion, and framing. 2. The client must decide whether media bytes are available while the background render may still be in progress. 3. The render job is completed, and the client now needs the MP4 bytes rather than job metadata. 4. After retention expires, the client must clear only video 7F2 from Azure OpenAI storage without starting another render. Available targets. A. Request the media content route only after the job state is completed. B. Read the asynchronous job resource to obtain its current render state. C. Submit a new render request carrying remix video ID set to the completed source assets ID. D. Issue the individual video storage removal operation for the supplied video ID. Lock in your answer. Correct response. 1. A completed video ID must seed a new render that reuses the source asset structure, motion, and framing. Matches submit a new render request carrying remix video ID set to the completed source assets ID. 2. The client must decide whether media bytes are available while the background render may still be in progress. Matches read the asynchronous job resource to obtain its current render state. 3. The render job is completed, and the client now needs the MP4 bytes rather than job metadata. Matches request the media content route only after the job state is completed. 4. After retention expires, the client must clear only video 7F2 from Azure OpenAI storage without starting another render. Matches issue the individual video storage removal operation for the supplied video ID. Why this works. A Sora 2 remix is a new render request whose remix video ID identifies a previously completed video. Because rendering is asynchronous, the client reads job states separately and requests MP4 content only after completion. Per video storage removal is a distinct operation on the supplied video ID. Exam pattern. Map Sora 2 preview requirements to create with remix ID, asynchronous job state inspection, completed media retrieval, and per video storage removal by API semantics. Question 2. A retail media team is building a Microsoft Foundry solution that analyzes product reference images, generates campaign images, and applies localized edits. The team must keep each Azure Media Model's API, lifecycle, region, and input constraints separate, rather than treating image generation, image analysis, and image editing as one interchangeable surface. Delta question. A developer prepared the following request manifest for a localized reference image change. Which 2 corrections are required for the documented Azure OpenAI GPT-image edit path? Visible artifact. The visible request uses Azure OpenAI generative pre-trained transformer image, spoken as GPT-image, with the generations operation and the GPT-image 2 deployment. Its prompt says replace only the blank label with the Spring logo. The input is a portable network graphics file named package.png at 1024 by 1024. The mask is a portable network graphics file named labelmask.png at 512 by 512. Select two answers. A. Send the reference image and optional mask as multi-part inputs to the separate edits path. B. Change the client to expect an image URL instead of base64 image output. C. Resize the mask to 1024 by 1024 so it matches the input image. D. Replace the deployment with DAL-E3 and keep the generations operation. E. Route the unchanged manifest to a MAI image endpoint because GPT-image and MAI share request contracts. Lock in your answer. Correct response. A. Send the reference image and optional mask as multi-part inputs to the separate edits path. C. Resize the mask to 1024 by 1024 so it matches the input image. Why this works. The documented GPT image workflow uses a separate edits path for reference image edits. The image is multi-part input, and an optional mask identifies edit regions. When supplied, the mask must be the same size as the input image. The held GPT image table specifies base64 only outputs, and legacy DAL-E3 retired on March 4, 2026, and is non-functional. Exam pattern. Diagnose a reference media image request that incorrectly uses the generation operation and a mismatched mask. Question 3. A team has deployed Sora 2 in a supported region and uses the Azure OpenAI V1 API. It must generate a 1280 by 720 video from a text prompt and use one PNG image as the visual anchor for the first frame. Which request design is supported? A. Start a Sora 2 preview remix by placing the PNG file path in Remix Video ID as an arbitrary source video. B. Start a Sora 2 preview create video job with the prompt and one PNG reference image sized exactly 1280 by 720. C. Start a Sora 2 preview create video job with two reference images of different sizes and MIME types. D. Send the prompt and PNG to a GPT image request and treat the returned image as a completed Sora 2 video. Lock in your answer. Correct response. B. Start a Sora 2 preview create video job with the prompt and one PNG reference image, sized exactly 1280 by 720. Why this works. Sora 2 Preview supports image to video through the Azure OpenAI V1 API. Create Video can accept one optional reference image as the first frame visual anchor. The image can be PNG and must match the requested output size exactly. The create call starts an asynchronous job, after which the application checks status and downloads the finished video. Exam pattern. Construct a valid Sora 2 image-to-video request using a single first-frame reference image. Question 4. An insurer processes a large volume of damage photos. A downstream claims workflow requires consistent fields named damage area, severity, and repair category, with defined output types. Users do not need a conversational description or follow-up questions. Which implementation best meets the requirement? A. Use a Content Understanding image analyzer without defining a schema and infer the required fields later from unspecified output. B. Define the required field descriptions and output types in an Azure Content Understanding image schema, then process the images. C. Use vision-enabled chat completions with private endpoint image URLs and assume the managed service can fetch them through the VNet. D. Use vision-enabled chat to ask a general question about each image and store the free-form textual reply unchanged. Lock in your answer. Correct response. B. Define the required field descriptions and output types in an Azure Content Understanding image schema. Then process the images. Why this works. Azure Content Understanding image APIs are designed for schema-defined, structured extraction from images. The schema specifies fields, descriptions, and output types, which fits a high-volume downstream workflow. Vision-enabled chat instead returns textual answers about uploaded images. Its held chat completions limits are image-specific, and public image URLs are required when URLs are used. Private endpoint, VNet restricted, and firewall restricted URLs are not supported. Exam pattern. Choose between freeform multimodal image chat and schema-driven image extraction for a downstream system. Question 5. A safety team plans to use Azure Content Understanding video analysis to determine whether a 1-second hand signal appears on a distant control panel. A pilot sometimes omits the signal even though the source video contains it. The team must decide whether the service output can be treated as a guaranteed record of that event. What should the team conclude? A. Do not treat the result as guaranteed. The service samples about 1 frame per second and scales frames to 512 by 512, so brief events and small or distant details can be missed. B. Use a URL reference analyze request instead of a direct upload because URL references prevent frame sampling omissions. C. Enable category-guided segmentation because each return segment is a spatial object box for the hand signal. D. Increase the S0 operations per minute allowance so every source frame is analyzed at its original resolution. Lock in your answer. Correct response. A. Do not treat the result as guaranteed. The service samples about 1 frame per second and scales frames to 512 by 512, so brief events and small or distant details can be missed. Why this works. Azure Content Understanding video analysis samples approximately 1 frame per second and scales frames to 512 by 512. Those documented limits can cause quick movements and small or distant details to be missed, so the pilot result is not a guaranteed event record. Exam pattern. Evaluate whether Content Understanding video output is sufficient evidence for a very brief, small visual event. Question 6. A media catalog uses Azure Content Understanding, API, version 2025-11-01 GA. For each stored video, the application must extract keyframes, a transcript, and chapter segments, and it must wait for analysis to finish before reading the result. Which implementation should the developer use? A. Submit the video to a retired preview API and wait for a synchronous response because GA removed operation polling. B. Post the video URL to pre-built video. Analyze and read a completed result only from the initial 200 response. C. Post the video URL to pre-built video search. Analyze, capture the operation location from the 202 accepted response, and poll it until status is succeeded. D. Post the video URL to pre-built image search. Analyze, then convert the returned image description into chapters. Lock in your answer. Correct response, C. Post the video URL to pre-built video search. Analyze, capture the operation location from the 202 accepted response, and poll it until status is succeeded. Why this works. In the documented 2025-11-01 GA workflow, pre-built video search processes a URL input to extract keyframes, transcript, and chapter segments. The analyze post returns 202 accepted with operation location, which the client polls until succeeded. Exam pattern. Configure the correct GA analyzer and asynchronous result lifecycle for searchable video insights. Question 7. An application must reject uploaded images when their detected harm severities violate category-specific policy, while allowing images that remain within the configured levels. A content safety resource is available in a supported region. Which design directly implements this requirement? A. Apply a visible watermark whenever any category is returned because category output is itself a watermark instruction. B. Configure allowed and prohibited severity levels for each harm category and use the resulting accepted or rejected disposition in the application. C. Use categories analysis only as a single label classifier and treat the highest category name as a brand usage decision. D. Create a custom incident and assume its creation automatically rejects matching images without a detection call. Lock in your answer. Correct response. B. Configure allowed and prohibited severity levels for each harm category and use the resulting accepted or rejected disposition in the application. Why this works. The supported visual policy mechanism is content safety image moderation with allowed and prohibited severity levels configured by harm category. The configured filters produce an accepted or rejected disposition, and categories analysis can return multiple harm category labels with severities for one image. Exam pattern. Choose the supported enforcement mechanism for category-specific inappropriate image policy. Question 8. A retail media team is building a Microsoft Foundry solution that analyzes product reference images, generates campaign images, and applies localized edits. The team must keep each Azure Media Model's API, lifecycle, region, and input constraints separate, rather than treating image generation, image analysis, and image editing as one interchangeable surface. Delta question. Designers need free-form answers to follow-up questions about uploaded product images. A downstream RAG indexing process separately needs schema-defined fields from each image. Which two implementations should the team choose? Select two answers. A. Use a Content Understanding image analyzer as an interchangeable replacement for conversational image follow-ups. B. Use a vision-enabled chat deployment for the designer's image questions and follow-up prompts. C. Use a Content Understanding image analyzer with defined fields, descriptions, and output types for the indexing process. D. Treat the image evidence as proof that the same request supports video input with identical limits. E. Use Vision chat completions as the schema engine, because free-form text guarantees the requested field structure. Lock in your answer. Correct response. B. Use a Vision-enabled chat deployment for the designer's image questions and follow-up prompts. C. Use a Content Understanding image analyzer with defined fields, descriptions, and output types for the indexing process. Why this works. Vision-enabled chat is the documented path for textual answers and follow-up questions about uploaded images. Content Understanding image analyzers are the documented path for schema-defined structured extraction. The held evidence is image-specific and does not establish video ingestion or shared limits. Exam pattern. Choose separate multimodal implementations for conversational image analysis and structured image extraction. Question 9. A trust team in a supported Azure region needs a detector for a newly emerging harmful visual pattern that is not represented by the base harm categories. The team accepts a preview dependency and will use the documented custom categories rapid image path. Which implementation is complete? A. Configure base 4 severity levels output and assume it learns the new visual pattern without incident samples or deployment. B. Create the incident with API version 2024-09-01 and immediately treat it as deployed without adding examples or calling detection. C. Use API version 2024-02-15 preview to create an incident with the content safety endpoint and key. Add image examples, deploy the incident, and invoke image incident detection. D. Use the custom categories Rapid API as a generally available global service and omit the region check and preview qualifier. Lock in your answer. Correct response. C. Use API version 2024-02-15 preview to create an incident with the content safety endpoint and key. Add image examples, deploy the incident, and invoke image incident detection. Why this works. The documented custom categories rapid image workflow is a select region preview path using API version 2024-02-15 preview. A complete flow creates an incident, adds examples, deploys the incident, and then invokes image incident detection with the content safety endpoint and key. Exam pattern. Implement the complete custom rapid image incident lifecycle for an emerging harmful pattern. Question 10. A team has deployed an MAI image model using the documented Preview MAI v1 surface. The application must edit a supplied photograph, authenticate with the resource, and receive a PNG result. Which request design stays within that surface? A. Call the MAI edits endpoint with a WebP URL in JSON and require the service to preserve WebP in the output. B. Send the photograph to the MAI generations endpoint as JSON and request a URL response with response format. C. Create a Sora 2 render job, poll its status, and download the edited photograph after the job succeeds. D. Call https:// resource name greater than .services.ai.azure.com/MAI/v1/images/edits. Send one JPEG or PNG as multi-part form data, and authenticate with a Microsoft Entra ID token or API key. Lock in your answer. Correct response, D. Call https:// resource-name greater than .services.ai.azure.com/my/v1/images/edits. Send one JPEG or PNG as multi-part form data, and authenticate with a Microsoft Entra ID token or API key. Why this works. For the documented preview MAI v1 surface, image editing uses the distinct /my/v1/images/edits endpoint. The input image is JPEG or PNG multi-part form data. Authentication uses the resource endpoint with either a Microsoft Entra ID token or API key, and the output is PNG. Exam pattern. Select the product local endpoint, transport, authentication, and format controls for an MAI image edit. Question 11. As of the held July 25, 2026 evidence, a production service still calls Azure Content Understanding API version 2025-05-01 preview to generate descriptions for image URLs. The team must migrate to a supported production path and continue waiting for each analysis result before consuming it. Which change should the team make? A. Move to 2024-12-01 preview because it is older and therefore has a longer production support period than the GA API. B. Post the image URL to pre-built image search, analyze with API version 2025-11-01 and subscription key authentication, then poll the returned operation location until succeeded. C. Keep 2025-05-01 preview because the archived page still calls it preview, and read the result synchronously from the post body. D. Use 2025-11-01 GA, but stop after the 202 accepted response, because GA analysis no longer exposes a result location. Lock in your answer. Correct response, B. Post the image URL to pre-built image search. Analyze with API version 2025-11-01 and subscription key authentication. Then poll the returned operation location until succeeded. Why this works. By the held July 25, 2026 retrieval, the 2024-12-01 preview and 2025-05-01 preview APIs had passed their July 15, 2026 retirement deadline and were historical no SLA, not for production, surfaces. The supported image description path uses pre-built image search. Analyze with API version 2025-11-01 GA, and its 202 accepted response supplies operation location for polling until succeeded. Exam pattern. Migrate an image description workflow from retired preview APIs to the current GA analyzer and preserve asynchronous result handling. Question 12. A creative application still depends on an existing DALL-E 3 deployment and lets users upload a product image plus a transparent edit region mask. The service must remain functional and constrain changes to the selected region. Which migration design follows the current Microsoft Foundry image generation contract? A. Keep the existing DALL-E 3 deployment because retirement blocks only new deployments. Call its edits operation, and preserve the current mask contract without moving to a GPT image model. B. Deploy a current GPT image model, send the image as multi-part input, and submit a smaller mask because the service expands any mask to the input dimensions before applying the edit. C. Deploy a current GPT image model, omit the source image and mask, use only a text generation request, and rely on the prompt to guarantee that pixels outside the requested edit region remain unchanged. D. Deploy a current GPT image model with an Azure OpenAI resource in a supported region. Call the image edits operation with multi-part image input, and send an optional mask that has the same dimensions as the input image. Lock in your answer. Correct response. D. Deploy a current GPT image model with an Azure OpenAI resource in a supported region. Call the image edits operation with multi-part image input, and send an optional mask that has the same dimensions as the input image. Why this works. DALL-E 3 retired on March 4, 2026. New deployments are unavailable, and existing deployments are non-functional. The current GPT image edit path accepts multi-part image input and an optional mask that must be the same size as the input image. A supported region Azure OpenAI resource and an appropriate GPT image deployment are prerequisites. Exam pattern. Choose a current localized image editing migration that satisfies both model lifecycle and request shape boundaries. Question 13. A moderation service must evaluate an uploaded image together with its associated caption because the caption changes whether the visual should be classified as harmful. The team can deploy only in an Azure region where the required feature is available and accepts a preview dependency. Which implementation best fits? A. Use custom categories standard to classify the image and caption because its trained implementation supports both modalities. B. Use image analyze only and discard the caption because the image only request automatically retrieves associated text. C. Use an unrestricted global endpoint because the multimodal feature has no Azure region limitation. D. Use the Azure AI Content Safety multimodal API to analyze the image with its associated text after provisioning the content safety resource in a supported region. Lock in your answer. Correct response. D. Use the Azure AI Content Safety multimodal API to analyze the image with its associated text after provisioning the content safety resource in a supported region. Why this works. The Preview Multimodal API analyzes image content together with associated text, so the combined context can be considered. the feature is available only in certain Azure regions, so the content safety resource must be provisioned in a supported region. Exam pattern. Select the correct moderation surface when harm classification depends on combined image and text context. You are halfway through the practice exam. Reset your attention. Keep image analysis, multimodal inference, image generation, editing, API, and lifecycle boundaries clear, and verify the exact mechanism each requirement needs. Question 14. A team is implementing Azure OpenAI Sora 2 preview through the V1 API. It will generate a landscape video from a prompt and use a customer image as the first frame visual anchor. Which input validation rule should the application enforce before creating the video? A. Require a previous generated video ID, because Sora 2 supports reference images only through Remix. B. Accept one JPEG, PNG, or WebP reference image only when its dimensions exactly match the requested output size. C. Resize only the long edge because the reference image and output size are allowed to differ on the short edge. D. Accept any number of reference images in any format because reference media is optional. Lock in your answer. Correct response, B. Accept one JPEG, PNG, or WebP reference image only when its dimensions exactly match the requested output size. Why this works. For the documented Sora 2 Preview V1 Create Video request, an optional reference input is a single JPEG, PNG, or WebP image used as a first frame visual anchor, and it must match the requested output size exactly. A remix ID is a distinct optional input. Exam pattern. Configure validation for Sora 2 reference media input before a Preview V1 video job is created. Question 15. A migration team finds an archived design that created a multi-file content understanding task in Foundry Classic by using Pro mode. The team is documenting what the design meant and whether it is still a current implementation path. Which note is accurate? A. The design reflects the archived classic preview workflow in which a multi-file task used Pro mode. Foundry Classic was deprecated July 15, 2026, and is no longer a current content understanding experience. B. The design describes current GA Pro behavior because Foundry Classic remains the required content understanding experience. C. The design proves that every current multi-input analyzer must use Pro mode in Foundry New. D. The design should be relabeled as current agentic mode because agentic mode is the direct renamed equivalent of Pro mode. Lock in your answer. Correct response. A. The design reflects the archived classic preview workflow in which a multi-file task used Pro mode. Foundry Classic was deprecated July 15, 2026, and is no longer a current content understanding experience. Why this works. In the archived Foundry Classic workflow, a multi-file task used Content Understanding Pro mode. That statement is historical. Foundry Classic was deprecated on July 15, 2026, and is no longer available as a current Content Understanding experience. Exam pattern. Interpret a legacy Pro mode configuration without promoting it into a current implementation path. Question 16. A logistics team uploads and indexes recorded warehouse videos in Azure AI Video Indexer. The application must find when the same real-world object reappears in a recording and needs the full temporal object data rather than summarized insights. Which implementation should the developer use? A. Call getVideoIndex with include summarized insights equals false and inspect detected objects, including the object ID and its repeated instances with start and end times. B. Run object detection before upload and indexing, because detected objects is available only for unindexed live video. C. Download only summarized insights and assume each appearance of the same object receives an unrelated object ID. D. Call the live stream insights path and read component bounding boxes, because the uploaded file object article defines components. Lock in your answer. Correct response. A. Call getVideoIndex with include summarized insights equals false and inspect detected objects, including the object ID and its repeated instances with start and end times. Why this works. For uploaded and indexed videos, the documented retrieval path is getVideoIndex with include summarized insights equals false, or the equivalent portal insights JSON download. Object results appear under detected objects. A unique object retains an ID and can contain multiple tracked instances with different start and end times. Exam pattern. Retrieve and interpret full temporal object tracking insights for uploaded and indexed video. Question 17. Your team uses Azure OpenAI Sora 2 Preview. A generated video has completed successfully, and the director wants a targeted change while reusing the video's structure, motion, and framing. Arrange the implementation steps for the remix workflow. Place all 4 steps in the correct order. A. Download the finished remixed video from the result endpoint. B. Identify the previously completed video ID that will be used as the remix source. C. Create a video job with the revised prompt and set remix video ID to the completed video ID. D. Check the remix job status until the remixed video is finished. Lock in your answer. Correct response, step 1. Identify the previously completed video ID that will be used as the remix source. Step 2. Create a video job with the revised prompt and set remix video ID to the completed video ID. Step 3. Check the remix job status until the remixed video is finished. Step 4. Download the finished remixed video from the result endpoint. Why this works. Sora 2 Preview Remix starts from the ID of a previously completed video. The application creates a new video job with remix video ID and the revised prompt, checks the asynchronous job status, and downloads the finished video only after completion. Exam pattern. Sequence a targeted Sora 2 Preview Remix of a completed generated video, rather than treating the change as a synchronous local edit. Question 18. An app uses Azure Vision Image Analysis 4.0 in a supported caption region. Its caption output is English only, and each SDK invocation supplies one image. Match each app requirement to the correct configuration or result contract. Requirements. 1. Return one sentence that describes the image as a whole. 2. Return one-sentence descriptions for up to 10 image regions, including their bounding boxes. 3. Invoke the SDK for the selected image and receive the generic analysis response object. Available targets. A. Submit a wildcard image batch and parse one aggregated caption result. B. Call Analyze or Analyze Async with one image and the selected visual features, then use Image Analysis result. C. Select dense captions and parse dense captions result. D. Select caption and parse caption result. Lock in your answer. Correct response 1. Return one sentence that describes the image as a whole. Matches select caption and parse caption result. 2. Return one sentence descriptions for up to 10 image regions, including their bounding boxes. Matches select dense captions and parse dense captions result. 3. Invoke the SDK for the selected image and receive the generic analysis response object. Matches call Analyze or Analyze Async with one image and the selected visual features, then use Image Analysis result. Why this works. Caption describes the whole image in one sentence and is read from caption result. Dense captions describes up to 10 regions and returns bounding boxes through dense captions result. Analyze or Analyze Async accepts one image with selected visual features and returns image analysis result. The held contract does not define a wildcard batch operation. Exam pattern. Map 3 single image image analysis 4.0 requirements to their feature selectors, result fields, and SDK invocation contract. Question 19. A retailer is redesigning image metadata. Listing cards expose a short screen reader field, while each product page has a multi-sentence narrative that can answer follow-up questions about the image. All generated content passes an editorial gate. Which two configurations should the team adopt? Select two answers. A. Generate both fields from one image analysis caption and append detected object tags to the product page field. B. Generate the product page field with Vision Chat and request likely off-image context whenever the pixels are inconclusive. C. Generate the product page field with Vision Chat under a task-specific prompt that limits claims to visible evidence. D. Generate the listing card field with image analysis captioning and route low-confidence results to editorial review. Lock in your answer. Correct response, C. Generate the product page field with Vision Chat under a task-specific prompt that limits claims to visible evidence. D. Generate the listing card field with image analysis captioning and route low-confidence results to editorial review. Why this works. Image analysis captioning supplies a one-sentence description suitable for the compact alt text field, with confidence informing review. Vision-enabled chat supports a prompted image description and follow-up response. Its task prompt should keep the narrative factual and descriptive rather than speculative. Exam pattern. Assign distinct generation mechanisms and safeguards to compact and narrative image modal contracts. Question 20. A field inspection application supports two experiences. During an active session, an inspector uploads one still image and asks several evidence-focused questions about it. Separately, supervisors query an archive of thousands of inspection images. Answers must distinguish visible facts from unsupported causal claims. Which architecture fits both experiences? A. Use one content understanding schema for the active image and archive, but answer follow-ups from general model context after extraction, and omit the source image attributes from collection retrieval results. B. Keep the uploaded image in a vision-enabled chat for session follow-ups. Use content understanding schemas to extract archive image details into a RAG index, and constrain both answer paths to observable evidence. C. Run each active session question against a content understanding index after discarding the uploaded image. Send the full archive to a vision-enabled chat on every supervisor turn, and allow causal summaries when confidence is high. D. Use vision-enabled chat only for the active image. Convert its first answer into the archive index, and answer collection questions from those prior chat summaries, while treating inferred causes as indexed evidence. Lock in your answer. Correct response, B. Keep the uploaded image in a vision-enabled chat for session follow-ups. Use content understanding schemas to extract archive image details into a RAG index, and constrain both answer paths to observable evidence. Why this works. Vision-enabled chat can retain the uploaded image for follow-up questions. For a collection, content understanding schemas extract image details into an index for RAG chat. Both paths should remain factual and avoid promoting an unobserved cause to a grounded fact. Exam pattern. Separate current image and collection grounding without conflating inference with evidence. Question 21. An application already uses a deployed GPT-image 1.5 model under limited access preview. For a new latency-sensitive experience, it must receive 3 intermediate images before the final result, and process the documented GPT-image series output correctly. Which request and response design should you implement? A. Set stream equals true and partial images equals 3. Then decode B64 JSON from each returned partial event and the final result. B. Create an asynchronous image job, poll queued through succeeded, and download the third intermediate result URL. C. Set response format equals URL and partial images equals 3. Then download each returned image URL from the event stream. D. Call the MAI image generation endpoint with stream equals true. Then parse 3 JPEG partial outputs from its job status. Lock in your answer. Correct response: A. Set stream equals true and partial images equals 3, then decode B64 JSON from each returned partial event and the final result. Why this works. For GPT-image-1 series models, stream equals true enables streaming, and partial images values 1 through 3 control the number of intermediate images before the final result. The documented events carry B64 JSON. GPT-image-1 series responses are base 64 and do not support response format. The Sora 2 job lifecycle and MAI API controls are separate surfaces. Exam pattern. Configure model local GPT-image-1.5 streaming controls and decode the correct output format without importing Sora 2 or MAI behavior. Question 22. A maintenance team is documenting an archived Foundry Classic content understanding workflow for historical compatibility. The archived workflow must process a multi-file task and may use the advanced reasoning and multiple input behavior documented by the 2025-0501 preview reference. Foundry Classic was deprecated July 15, 2026, and is not being proposed as a current experience. Which historical configuration should the document specify? A. Content Understanding Standard Mode because it was the archive default. B. Current Agentic Mode because its 2026-0601 preview workflow is equivalent to Pro. C. Foundry Classic Current Mode because the Classic experience remains supported after July 15, 2026. D. Content Understanding Pro Mode for the archived multi-file task. Lock in your answer. Correct response: D. Content Understanding Pro Mode for the archived multi-file task. Why this works. In the archived Classic workflow, a multi-file task uses Content Understanding Pro Mode. The 2025-0501 preview reference associates Pro with advanced reasoning and multiple input capabilities. This is a historical classification only. Foundry Classic was deprecated July 15, 2026, and current agentic mode is a distinct 2026-0601 preview workflow with an initial one input file boundary, not evidence of Pro equivalence. Exam pattern. Classify a historical archived multi-file content understanding task without presenting the Classic preview mode as a current design choice. Question 23. A retailer is building chat over a collection of still product images by using the GA Content Understanding Image use case. The solution must structure image details, place those details in an index, and answer only from image-derived evidence. Arrange the implementation steps. Place all 4 steps in the correct order. A. Define a schema with the fields, descriptions, and output types required from the product images. B. Use the populated index to supply image-derived content to the user-facing chat experience, and constrain answers to factual image content without unsupported causal claims. C. Store the extracted image details in the index used by the chat solution. D. Analyze the still images with the schema to extract the required key details. Lock in your answer. Correct response. Step 1. Define a schema with the fields, descriptions, and output types required from the product images. Step 2. Analyze the still images with the schema to extract the required key details. Step 3. Store the extracted image details in the index used by the chat solution. Step 4. Use the populated index to supply image-derived content to the user-facing chat experience, and constrain answers to factual image content without unsupported causal claims. Why this works? The schema first defines what content understanding must extract from the still images. Analysis produces those structured details, which are placed in the index. The populated index then powers user-facing chat, whose responses are constrained to factual image-derived content rather than speculation. Exam pattern. Order an image-only content understanding extraction, indexing, and grounded chat implementation. Question 24. A media company uses a GPT-image deployment to generate campaign scenes from an approved spokesperson portrait and a text prompt. The request must remain at medium output quality to satisfy a fixed rendering budget. Reviewers report that the spokesperson's facial features drift from the portrait. Which request configuration should the team use? A. Set output quality to high and input fidelity to standard. B. Set output quality to medium and input fidelity to high. C. Set output quality to medium and input fidelity to standard. D. Set output quality to high and input fidelity to high. Lock in your answer. Correct response, B. Set output quality to medium and input fidelity to high. Why this works? Keep output quality at medium and set input fidelity to high. Output quality and input fidelity are separate controls. The fixed rendering budget determines the output quality setting, while input fidelity controls how much effort the model puts into matching the input image's style and features, especially facial features. Microsoft Learn states that high input fidelity preserves faces more accurately than standard mode. Therefore, standard input fidelity does not address the identity drift requirement, and either configuration that raises output quality to high violates the requirement to keep output quality at medium. Exam pattern. Keep the required medium output quality value while changing the independent input preservation control to the setting documented to preserve faces more accurately. Question 25. A design service has a deployed GPT image model. It sends a 1536 by 1024 source image, a 1024 by 1024 mask, and an edit prompt as JSO to the generations endpoint. The request must modify only the masked region while preserving the source canvas. Which revision matches the documented editing contract? A. Call the deployed model's images/generations path with multi-part form data, include the source image and prompt, and resize the mask to 1536 by 1024 before submission. B. Call the deployed model's images/edits path with a JSON body, encode the source and mask as strings, and retain the 1024 by 1024 mask for the selected region. C. Call the deployed model's images/edits path with multi-part form data, include the source image and prompt, and resize the mask to 1536 by 1024 before submission. D. Call the deployed model's images/edits path with multi-part form data, retain the 1024 by 1024 mask, and request a 1024 by 1024 output so the mask defines the final canvas. Lock in your answer. Correct response, C. Call the deployed model's images/edits path with multi-part form data, include the source image and prompt, and resize the mask to 1536 times 1024 before submission. Why this works? The documented edit request uses the deployed GPT images/edits path and multi-part form data. A supplied mask must have the same dimensions as the input, so it must be 1536 times 1024. Generations is a different operation. JSON does not match the shown edit envelope, and output size does not cure an input mask mismatch. Exam pattern. Apply endpoint, envelope, and mask contracts. You completed AI-103 practice exam, Computer Vision Solutions. Review the mechanisms you missed, revisit the official documentation where needed, and use the next set to strengthen your exam-ready judgment. Thank you for practicing with WebLizard CertLab. Continue with AI-103 practice exam, Text Analysis Solutions.